A black maid sat alone at the wedding until a stranger billionaire whispered, "Act like you're." She wasn't invited. She wasn't even supposed to be seen. Maya Coleman, 28 years old, stood in the back hallway of the grandest ballroom in Charleston, still wearing her cleaning uniform, when a stranger in a tailored black suit grabbed her hand and said 5 words that would change her life forever. "Act like you're with me." She had no idea who he was. She had no idea what she was walking into. But in the next 60 seconds, 300 wealthy guests would turn their heads, a woman in white would go pale, and Maya's entire world would tilt on its axis. What happened next? Nobody in that ballroom would ever forget. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's story, grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable because this one is going to take you on a ride. If you love stories about dignity, unexpected love, and second chances, you are exactly where you need to be. So tell me, what city are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments. Now, let's begin. The chandeliers at the Ashford Grand Hotel dripped gold light across 300 faces, but Maya Coleman wasn't looking at any of them. She was looking at the floor, at the hem of her gray uniform, at the black rubber shoes that squeaked slightly on marble too polished for someone like her to be standing on. She had been hired by the catering company to help set the reception hall for the Whitfield Harmon wedding, one of the biggest social events Charleston had seen in years. Her job was simple: arrange chairs, refill water glasses, disappear into the background before the ceremony began. She was good at disappearing. Years of cleaning other people's houses, other people's offices, other people's lives had taught her how to move through a room like a shadow, present, useful, invisible. "Coleman, table 12 needs more napkins," her supervisor, a thin woman named Denise, snapped without looking up from her clipboard. "Yes, ma'am," Maya said, already moving. She didn't mind the work. She minded the way some of the guests looked at her, or didn't look at her at all. The way eyes slid past a staff uniform like it was furniture. She minded it, but she had learned long ago that minding things didn't pay her son's daycare bill. Marcus was 4 years old, and he was waiting for her at her sister's apartment right now, probably asking when Mommy would be home. She was refilling water at table 12 when she heard the whisper start. "Is that really necessary? Having them walk right through the ceremony space." "I heard the bride specifically requested black staff be kept in the back rooms during photos. Something about the aesthetic." Maya's hands went still over the picture. She didn't turn around. She had heard worse in 8 years of service work, but something about hearing it here, tonight, in this dress she'd pressed for 2 hours that morning even though it was just a uniform, made her chest tighten in a way she hadn't expected. She finished pouring the water and walked to the small break room set aside for staff. Really just a converted supply closet with a folding chair and a mirror nobody had bothered to clean. She sat down for exactly 90 seconds, which was all the break she was allowed, and looked at her reflection. "You're fine," she whispered to herself. "You're fine. Get back out there." When she stepped back into the hallway, a man in a charcoal suit was walking briskly toward her, phone pressed to his ear, jaw tight with tension. He was tall, with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. His shoes alone probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months. He ended his call abruptly and looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. Maya expected him to look through her the way most of the guests did. Instead, he stopped walking. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you working the reception tonight?" "Yes, sir. I'm with the catering staff." He glanced past her, toward the ballroom doors, where the string quartet had just begun tuning their instruments. Something crossed his face, frustration, maybe panic, quickly hidden. "I need a favor," he said. "And I know this is going to sound strange." Maya felt her guard go up immediately. She had learned to read men like this. Wealthy, used to getting what they wanted, assuming a staff uniform meant a lower price on a person's dignity. "Sir, I really need to get back to my station." "My name is Daniel Ashford," he said quickly. "This is my hotel. My family's hotel. And in about 4 minutes, my ex-fiancé is going to walk down that aisle to marry my former business partner, and every single person in that room is going to spend the entire reception watching me to see how I react." Maya blinked. "I'm sorry, that sounds difficult, but I don't see what that has to do with." I need you to act like you're with me, he said. Just for the reception. Just so I'm not the man standing alone while everyone whispers about how pathetic I am. I will pay you. Whatever your shift is worth tonight, I will pay you 10 times that. I just need 1 hour where I'm not the punchline of Charleston society. Maya stared at him. Somewhere behind her, Denise's voice was already calling her name, sharp with irritation. Somewhere in her mind, a small, tired voice reminded her that Marcus needed new shoes for daycare, that her car had been making a sound she couldn't afford to fix, that 10 times her hourly rate was not nothing. But mostly, she stared at him because nobody, not one person in 3 years of working events like this, had ever looked at her and seen a person he could ask a favor of, rather than a uniform he could ignore. You want me to pretend to be your date, she said slowly. At a wedding full of people who look like they own small countries. Yes. Sir, I'm wearing a catering uniform. Daniel Ashford's eyes flicked briefly to her outfit, and something in his expression softened. Not pity, Maya noted carefully, watching for it. Something closer to embarrassment on his own behalf. There's a dress in my suite, he said. Black, simple, should fit you. It was meant for someone else, a long story. I don't have time for right now. Please. I'm not asking you to do anything but stand next to me and let people believe I'm not falling apart. The string quartet shifted into a new song. Somewhere down the hall, Maya heard Denise's heels clicking closer, calling her name a third time with real anger now. Why me? Maya asked because it was the only question that mattered. You don't know me. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice had lost its urgency, gone quiet and almost surprised at itself. Because you're the only person in this entire building tonight who looks at me like I'm a person and not an invitation to network, he said. Everyone else in there wants something from me. You don't even want to be near me. It wasn't flattery. Maya could tell the difference between a man performing charm and a man who was, in that moment, simply telling the truth because he had nothing left to lose. And that honesty, more than the money, was what made her hesitate instead of walking away. 1 hour, she said finally. And I keep my job after tonight, no matter what Denise says about me disappearing. Done, Daniel said. I own the building. Denise works for me too. For the first time since she'd stepped into that hallway, Maya almost smiled. The dress fit like it had been made for her, which unsettled Maya more than she wanted to admit. It was simple, floor-length, black silk that moved like water, with sleeves that covered the small burn scar on her forearm from a coffee shop job years ago. She stood in front of the suite's full-length mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back. You look like you belong here, said a voice from the doorway. Daniel stood there in the same charcoal suit, tie now straightened, hair combed back. He looked, Maya thought, like a man bracing for impact. I don't belong here, Maya said. I clean bathrooms in buildings like this. Sometimes literally this building. Tonight you're my guest, Daniel said. That's all anyone needs to know. What's my name supposed to be? What do I say if someone asks how we met? Daniel considered this. The truth, mostly. Just edited. We met a few months ago. You work in hospitality. I found you interesting immediately. That's not a lie, Maya said before she could stop herself, and then flushed, because she hadn't meant to say that part out loud, hadn't meant to acknowledge that there was, in fact, something a little disarming about a rich man who looked this uncomfortable in his own skin. They walked into the ballroom together 15 minutes before the ceremony, and Maya felt every single eye in the room turn toward them like a wave. The whispers started immediately. She heard fragments. Who is that? Daniel brought someone? I've never seen her before, and beneath the whispers, she felt the particular weight of being watched by people trying to categorize her, place her, decide what she was doing there. At the front of the room, near the altar, a woman in a wedding gown turned to look, and for just a moment, her carefully composed bridal smile cracked. That's her, Daniel murmured under his breath. Vivian. Vivian Whitfield was beautiful in the practiced way of someone who had been photographed since childhood. Golden hair, sharp cheekbones, a smile built for cameras. But the look she gave Maya wasn't practiced at all. It was raw surprise, followed quickly by something colder. The ceremony began, and Maya sat beside Daniel in the third row, close enough to family that it made a statement, far enough that it didn't seem presumptuous. She watched Vivian marry Grant Harmon, Daniel's former business partner, a man with the easy, confident smile and eyes that never quite settled on anyone for long. Throughout the ceremony, Maya was intensely aware of Daniel beside her, not romantically, not yet, but as a study in restraint. His jaw was tight, his hands, folded in his lap, occasionally curled into fists before deliberately relaxing again. He was performing calm and performing it well, but Maya had spent a lifetime reading the difference between people who were fine and people who had simply gotten very good at looking fine. "You okay?" she whispered, surprising herself with the question. Daniel glanced at her, startled. "Nobody's asked me that tonight. I'm asking." "I will be," he said, which wasn't an answer. But Maya let it go. The reception began in the same ballroom Maya had been setting up 2 hours earlier. She recognized the tables, the centerpieces she'd helped arrange, the water pitchers she'd filled. It was surreal, sitting at table 3 instead of refilling glasses at table 12, watching Denise pass by without a flicker of recognition. The uniform had made Maya invisible, and now its absence made her, apparently, unrecognizable. "Daniel Ashford." A voice cut through the ambient chatter, warm and performative. A tall man in his 50s approached, champagne in hand, eyes already assessing Maya with open curiosity. "And who is this?" "Maya Coleman," Daniel said smoothly. "Maya, this is Robert Ellis, my father's old business partner." "Coleman," Robert repeated, extending a hand. "I don't believe we've met. What is it you do?" Maya felt Daniel tense slightly beside her, and she understood, suddenly, exactly what this moment was, a test, one of many that would come throughout the night, each one designed to determine whether she belonged, whether her presence beside Daniel Ashford was legitimate or an aberration to be quietly corrected. She could have lied. Daniel had given her an opening to lie. But something in her, pride, maybe, or exhaustion with pretending to be smaller than she was, made her look Robert Ellis directly in the eye. "I work in hospitality management," she said, which was true in the broadest possible sense. "I've spent years learning how events like this actually come together. It's more complicated than people think." "Fascinating," Robert said, in a tone that suggested he found it anything but, and moved on quickly to find someone more interesting. "You didn't have to do that," Daniel said quietly once Robert was gone. "You could have just said you worked in finance or something. Made it easier." "Easier for who?" Maya asked. Daniel didn't have an answer for that either, and Maya noticed, with some surprise, that he seemed to be filing the question away rather than dismissing it. Across the room, Vivian Whitfield, now Vivian Harmon, was watching them with an intensity that had nothing to do with wedding day joy. By the time the toasts began, Maya had been introduced as Daniel's guest to no fewer than 20 people, and she had memorized the particular flavor of surprise each one wore. The too bright smile, the slightly too long pause before a handshake, the eyes that flicked down to her hands as if checking for a ring, a bracelet, some marker of belonging she might be missing. She had also, against every instinct she'd built over years of protecting herself, started to enjoy Daniel's company. He was funny in a dry, understated way that caught her off guard. He asked her real questions about Marcus, about her sister, about the classes she'd been trying to take at night before childcare costs made it impossible, and he listened to the answers instead of using the silence to plan his next sentence. When the best man stood to give his toast, Daniel's hand found the edge of the table and gripped it, and without thinking, Maya reached over and rested her hand lightly over his. "You don't have to listen to this part," she murmured. "I do," Daniel said. "Grant was my best friend for 12 years. I need to hear what he says about the woman I almost married." The toast was full of easy jokes and warm laughter, the kind that filled a room with goodwill, and Maya watched Daniel's face carefully as Grant spoke about meeting Vivian right around the time Daniel and I were building the company, a phrase that landed in the room like something Daniel alone seemed to fully understand. "He's talking about the timeline," Daniel said under his breath, so quiet only Maya could hear. "They want everyone to believe it started after Vivian and I ended things. It didn't." "How long?" Maya asked, though she wasn't sure she should. For months, Daniel said. 4 months of overlap I didn't know about until 3 weeks before what would have been our wedding. Grant was helping me plan the honeymoon logistics. Turns out he'd already been somewhere with her that I thought was a business trip. Maya's chest tightened with an anger that surprised her in its intensity, anger on behalf of a man she'd met 2 hours ago. And he still gets to stand up there and give a toast at your former partnership's expense, and everyone just claps? That's how this world works, Daniel said, something bitter and tired in his voice. Everyone smiles. Everyone claps. Nobody says the true thing out loud. That sounds exhausting. It is. He looked at her directly then, something shifting in his expression. You know what's strange? I've known you for 2 hours, and you've said more honest things to me than most people say in years. Maybe honesty's easier when you don't have anything invested in impressing someone, Maya said. Is that what this is? You're not impressed? Maya considered the question seriously, which seemed to surprise him more than a quick dismissal would have. I think you're a person having a very hard night, trying very hard not to show it. I think that's more interesting than impressive. Before Daniel could respond, Vivian appeared at their table, champagne glass in hand, smile pinned firmly in place, though her eyes carried none of its warmth. Daniel, she said. I'm so glad you came. And you brought someone. Her gaze slid to Maya, with an assessment so thorough it felt like being appraised for resale value. I don't believe we've met properly. Vivian, this is Maya Coleman, Daniel said, his voice perfectly level. Maya, Vivian Harmon. Coleman, Vivian repeated, the same way Robert Ellis had, as if testing the name for a hidden meaning. How lovely. And how did you two meet? A few months ago, Daniel said, exactly as he'd rehearsed with Maya earlier. She's been very important to me since. How romantic, Vivian said, in a tone that suggested she found nothing romantic about it at all. You'll have to forgive me, Daniel, but I do have to ask, is this the same Maya who used to work catering events at your father's hotel? I'm almost certain I recognize her from somewhere. The table went very quiet. Maya felt her pulse spike, felt the old, familiar instinct to shrink, apologize, disappear, the instinct that had kept her safe and small for years. She looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back at her, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't expected. Not panic, not embarrassment, but a quiet, steady question. Your call. I'll follow your lead either way. Maya took a slow breath and made a decision. Yes, she said clearly, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. I've worked catering events at this hotel for the past 3 years. In fact, I helped set up this exact reception this evening, before Daniel asked me to join him as his guest. A ripple moved through the nearby tables, not quite silence, but a kind of charged attentiveness, the sound of a room deciding how to react before anyone had actually reacted. Vivian's smile flickered. Well, that's certainly a story. It is, Maya agreed. Would you like to hear the rest of it, or would you prefer to get back to your reception? For a moment, Vivian's composure cracked entirely, something ugly and cornered flashing across her face before she smoothed it back into place. Enjoy your evening, she said tightly and walked away. The table erupted into hushed, urgent whispering the moment she was out of earshot, but Daniel was looking at Maya like he'd never seen her before. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. I know, Maya said, but I'm tired of being someone's secret. Even a secret I made up an hour ago. Daniel reached over and, this time, took her hand fully in his. For what it's worth, he said, I think you just became the most interesting person at this wedding. Word traveled through the reception like fire through dry grass. By the time the band began playing for the first dance, everyone in the room seemed to know the story, some version of it, at least, exaggerated and reshaped with each retelling. The maid who'd walked in wearing a uniform and walked out on Daniel Ashford's arm, who had stood up to Vivian Harmon in front of half of Charleston's old money. Maya felt the eyes differently now. Some were cold, calculating, the same instinct to categorize and dismiss. But others, more than she expected, were curious, even admiring. An older woman with silver hair and kind eyes stopped by their table. I don't know you, dear, the woman said. But I watched what happened over there, and I want you to know, that took courage. Most people in this room have spent their whole lives learning how to hide who they are to fit in here. You just walked in and refused. Thank you, Maya said, genuinely moved. I'm Eleanor Ashford, the woman said. Daniel's grandmother. Maya's stomach dropped. Oh, Mrs. Ashford, I should explain this isn't. I know exactly what this is, dear, Eleanor said, smiling. My grandson asked a stranger to save him from public humiliation, and instead of simply performing a favor, you gave him something considerably more valuable. Honesty. Do you know how rare that is in this family circles? Daniel, returning from the bar with 2 drinks, froze at the sight of his grandmother deep in conversation with Maya. Grandma Eleanor. I see you've met Maya. I have, Eleanor said, patting Maya's hand. I like her enormously. Don't lose this one, Daniel. You've lost enough good things this year, through carelessness. She moved on, leaving Daniel staring after her, slightly stunned. She doesn't usually approve of anyone, he said. Maybe she recognizes when someone isn't performing, Maya said. They danced, later, when the band slowed into something old and sweet, and for a few minutes Maya forgot entirely that this had begun as a favor, a transaction, a business arrangement between strangers. Daniel held her carefully, like something he was afraid of damaging, and Maya found herself studying his face, the tired lines around his eyes, the way his jaw relaxed slightly when he stopped performing composure and simply let himself feel something. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. Why did Vivian really leave? The truth, not the version everyone tells at weddings. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I think she never wanted the version of me that existed before the money. My father built this hotel from 1 small property into 6 across the southeast. I grew up watching him work 18-hour days, watching my mother slowly become a stranger in her own marriage because she was married to a schedule instead of a person. I promised myself I'd never be like that. I turned down expanding the company for years because I wanted a life outside of it. And Vivian? Vivian wanted the expansion. She wanted the version of me my father was. When I wouldn't become that, she found someone who already was. Grant. Grant, Daniel confirmed. He's been trying to buy out my shares of the company for 2 years. I think, in hindsight, Vivian leaving and Grant's business proposals were never entirely separate conversations. Maya absorbed this slowly. That's a lot to carry alone. I haven't told anyone that, Daniel admitted. Not even my grandmother knows the full timeline. Why tell me? Because you're the first person tonight who asked a question and actually wanted the honest answer instead of the polite one. The song ended, but neither of them moved to separate. Around them, the reception continued. Laughter, clinking glasses, the ordinary noise of celebration, but for a moment, it felt distant, like they were standing in a small, private pocket of quiet in the middle of a very loud room. I should tell you something too, Maya said. Marcus, my son, he's the reason I said yes to this tonight. I needed the money. That's the honest truth. I wasn't drawn in by kindness or curiosity at first. I was thinking about daycare bills. I know, Daniel said gently. I could tell. And I appreciate that you're telling me now instead of pretending it was something else. Does it bother you? That it started as a transaction? No, Daniel said. What bothers me is the idea that it has to stay one. Before Maya could respond, a commotion rose near the entrance. Raised voices, the particular tension of an argument trying and failing to stay contained. Grant Harmon was standing near the gift table, face flushed with anger, gesturing sharply at a man in a dark suit that Maya didn't recognize. That's my company's lawyer, Daniel said, frowning. What is he doing here? They moved closer and Maya heard fragments of the argument, something about shareholder documents, about a filing deadline, about papers that shouldn't have existed at all. You had no right showing up at my wedding with this, Grant hissed. Mr. Ashford asked me to deliver time-sensitive documents the moment the ceremony concluded, the lawyer said evenly. He was very specific about the timing. Every head in the ballroom had turned now, drawn by the sudden tension the way a room turns toward the sound of breaking glass. Daniel stepped forward, and Maya watched him transform, the tired, quietly wounded man from the dance floor replaced by someone sharper, steadier, entirely in control. "Grant," Daniel said, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly silent room. "I believe you have some documents to sign. Given the timing of your wedding, I thought it was only fitting to formalize things today." "You're doing this now? At my wedding?" "You announced your engagement to my former fiancé 4 months after admitting the affair began before we'd even ended things," Daniel said, calm and clear enough for everyone to hear. "I think today is exactly the right day for this conversation." The lawyer's papers, it turned out, were the final buyout agreement, the paperwork that would formally sever Grant Harmon's ownership stake in Ashford Hospitality Group, a deal that had been negotiated for months, but deliberately timed, Daniel later admitted, to conclude on this particular day. "It's not about revenge," Daniel told Maya quietly as the room buzzed with shocked whispers and Grant's furious protests faded into the background. "It's about closing a chapter. I've spent 6 months negotiating this buyout because I couldn't build the company's future with a partner who'd already shown me exactly how much loyalty meant to him. The timing was symbolic, maybe unnecessarily so. But I wanted him to sign it on the day he thought he'd won everything, so he'd understand he hadn't taken anything from me that mattered." "And Vivian?" "Vivian gets exactly what she wanted," Daniel said. "A husband who prioritizes ambition over everything else. I hope it makes her happy. I genuinely do." Grant, red-faced and cornered by his own lawyer's insistence that the paperwork was, in fact, legally binding and overdue regardless of the venue, stormed toward the exit with Vivian trailing after him, her bridal train dragging across the marble floor behind her like something wilting. The ballroom exhaled as one collective breath once they were gone, and slowly, gradually, the music started again. The caterers reappeared with fresh trays, and the wedding reception limped back towards something resembling normalcy, minus its groom, who did not return. Eleanor Ashford approached Daniel and pressed his hand warmly. "Well," she said, "that was considerably more dramatic than I expected from you, dear. I'm rather proud." "Thank you, Grandma." "And you," Eleanor said, turning to Maya. "I do hope you're planning to see my grandson again after night. I'd hate for this to have been a single, dramatic evening and nothing more." Maya laughed despite herself, some of the tension of the evening finally breaking. "I think that's between Daniel and me, Mrs. Ashford." "Naturally," Eleanor said, entirely unbothered, and moved off toward the bar with the satisfied air of a woman who had witnessed exactly the kind of evening she'd hoped for. Later, when the reception finally wound down and the last guests trickled out into the Charleston night, Daniel walked Maya to her car, an older sedan with a persistent engine rattle, parked in the staff lot 3 blocks from the hotel's elegant valet stand, a detail neither of them commented on, but both silently understood. "So," Daniel said, "I believe I owe you 10 times your hourly wage." "You do," Maya said. "Marcus needs new shoes." "I could arrange that transfer tonight," Daniel said. "Or I could ask you something else instead, and you could tell me if the money's still necessary after you hear it." "What's the something else?" "Dinner. Not staged. Not a favor. Just dinner, with someone who spent tonight being more honest with me than anyone has been in years." Maya considered him carefully in the dim light of the parking lot. This man who owned 6 hotels and still looked, somehow, like someone who needed to be told the truth more than he needed to be flattered. "I have a son," she said. "I have a job that starts at 6 a.m. most mornings. I don't have time for anything that isn't real." "I'm not offering anything that isn't real," Daniel said. "I'm offering exactly what happened tonight. Someone willing to be honest with me, and someone I'd like to be honest with in return. Whatever comes after that, we figure out together." Maya thought of Marcus, asleep by now at her sister's apartment. She thought of the years she'd spent making herself smaller, quieter, easier to overlook, because that was what survival had required. She thought about the moment tonight when she'd stood in front of Vivian Harmon and refused, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to shrink. "Dinner," she said. "But you're picking me up from my actual apartment, not sending a car to make it easier to pretend I live somewhere grander." "Deal," Daniel said, smiling a real smile, Maya noticed, different from every polite, practiced expression he'd worn throughout the reception. 3 months later, Maya stood in the kitchen of her new apartment, nicer than her old one, though still modestly hers, paid for by her own promotion to event coordinator at Ashford Hospitality, a job she'd earned after Daniel quietly mentioned to the events director that the company was overlooking talented staff who'd been invisible for years simply because nobody had bothered to look. She hadn't asked him to do it. She'd been furious briefly until she saw the interview requirements and realized she'd have qualified regardless. Marcus sat at the counter, drawing pictures of hotels with crayons, occasionally announcing that he wanted to build the biggest hotel in the whole world someday. Daniel arrived that evening with takeout and the particular exhaustion of a man who'd spent the day finalizing the company's expansion into 2 new cities, an expansion he'd finally agreed to, not because of pressure or old ambitions, but because he'd found, quietly, a version of himself that could build something without losing what mattered most. Long day? Maya asked, taking the takeout bags from his hands. Long day, he agreed. But a good one. Marcus, buddy, I brought you the chicken nuggets, extra ketchup, just how you like them. Thanks, Daniel, Marcus said, without looking up from his drawing. Maya watched them together for a moment, her son, comfortable and unguarded around a man who 3 months ago had been a stranger asking a favor in a hotel hallway, and felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't expected to feel again after years of learning not to hope for too much. She thought sometimes about that night, about the version of herself that had almost walked past Daniel Ashford, embarrassed and eager to disappear back into her uniform and her invisible place in the world. She thought about how close she'd come to saying no. But she hadn't said no. And in saying yes to one strange, honest request in a hotel hallway, she had said yes to a different life entirely, not because a billionaire had rescued her, she reminded herself firmly, but because she had never actually needed rescuing. She had simply needed one moment where someone finally saw her clearly, and she had been brave enough to be seen. The lesson, if there was one, wasn't about wealth or weddings or dramatic reversals in crowded ballrooms.
It was simpler than that.
Dignity isn't something other people grant you. It's something you carry with you into every room, uniform or not, waiting for the moment you're brave enough to let it show. If this story moved you tonight, I want you to do 3 things for me. First, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need a story like this one. Second, subscribe if you haven't already, because we've got so many more emotional journeys coming your way. And third, I want to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done in Maya's shoes if a stranger asked you to act like you belonged? Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that dignity was never something anyone else could take from them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.